Quickly introduce myself. I am Chani Modi. I'll be your host today. I've spent last 2 decades building and scaling enterprise platforms and resilient teams. I've built businesses and I've helped grow multi-billion dollar businesses at VMware as well. All right, let's get started. So I want you to imagine this scenario. You've got an IIT, IIM background. People from India would understand that. You scaled businesses to billions, and yet when you try to break into Silicon Valley, big tech, it's crickets. That was Bhaskar's reality. But here's the thing, he didn't just figure it out, he cracked the code so thoroughly that he is now driven over 5 billion in incremental revenue across Meta, TikTok, Rakuten, and Flipkart. So, Bhaskar, that opening story about your credentials meaning nothing, that must sting, right?
Hey, a big time, right? And I literally had to rewire myself inside out. And this goes back to some of the jokes that we were sharing earlier. And think that, hey, there's a world, then there's a big tech world, right? And I know Nathan made the joke about how in big tech you got to be rude, but increasingly you see examples. I mean, people look at Mark Zuckerberg, people look at the Snapchat CEO's response to Mark when he made an offer to buy them out, or now you look at what's happening with Elon, right? So it looks like in big tech, they're operating in a very different world than what happens in the rest of the world or in the rest of America, right? So then the question then becomes, hey, I actually succeeded. I have top degrees. And I also see comments here that say, hey, you know what, to break into big tech, you actually need a degree from maybe a top CS school, right? Or you got to sort of lead code like crazy. So how do you actually break through all this noise and clutter and get into it, right? And I had to do it not just once, but twice. And therefore, yeah, it actually resonates a lot with me. And I'll sort of walk through my journey and hope it helps a few other people that see it and that sort of want to do the same transition. And by the way, hey, I have a few slides, but we can make this completely conversational. Given that we have a group of about 20 odd people here, feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to jump in when you want to maybe either share your experiences or ask me a question about what I'm sharing, right? This can be totally informal, right? Hey, so ultimately, right, I think what I want to share today is how do you break in, right? There's big tech, and big tech is not just FANG, but FANG type companies that have achieved massive scale, and maybe the reason why the companies are behaving the way they are is because all these are winner takes all markets. These companies either have a tech advantage or a product advantage or a platform advantage or moved in first into an area and figured out how to make money. And then all these firms are filled with super smart people, super ambitious people. So they have then built on their successes. So essentially, it's almost like doing one thing well or doing one thing exceptionally well got them there, and they continue doing it. Any other thing that did not work for them is wrong or is incorrect. In that case, right, you could have been a Fortune 500 leader, you could have been a startup founder, you could have graduated from top schools, but these companies speak a different language, right? They're not impressed by your resume, they're not impressed by your background. So then the question is, what works, right? Because these companies do employ tens of thousands of people. So what is it that these people did there that you are maybe not doing? Or what is it that these people did that you need to do, which is just incremental that will get you there, right? So that's essentially what I'll be sharing today. So my story, right, is very interesting, right? I pretty much used to be in what is considered corporate America. I used to work in banking and capital markets for about 10 years of my career between 2001 and 2012. And after the financial meltdown in 2008, people like me were thinking about what to do with the rest of our lives, right? And I maybe identified early enough that, hey, maybe Silicon Valley is going to grow, Silicon Valley is going to scale, right? So I led groups and I led businesses at Credit Suisse and Barclays that generated hundreds of millions of dollars. But I had to figure out how to translate that into Silicon Valley speak. I had to figure out how to maybe unlearn everything that I learned. And this is where, I mean, I am not kidding you. I actually learned a lot more from the Luke Wilson Vince Vaughn movie than from any other advice other people might have given me. I even remember some of the funky jokes that they used to have saying, hey, if we shrink you to the size of a penny and you put it into a mixer and we turn it on, what's going to happen to you, right? And this literally used to be the joke about how Google and Microsoft used to have people think, right? And you had to unlearn everything and relearn everything in a new and different way, which is not easy at all, right? And it's not just that one transition, right? I did this at Yahoo. Afterwards, I felt that, hey, maybe there's a lot more to be done internationally. I moved to India, I moved to Asia. I worked in Flipkart, worked at Yodlee, worked at Rakuten, led teams of more than 100 people and led initiatives that generated billions of dollars of revenue. But around the pandemic time, we came back to the US and we ended up settling or resettling down here in Silicon Valley. The second transition was even more harder, right? Because now, unlike 10 years ago, I was not really looking at entry level roles in Silicon Valley. I'm like, hey, I have actually built a business at Rakuten that generates more than $1 billion a year. I have managed more than 100 people. I'm a general manager. The buck stops at me. But now I talk to Google or the Meta, they do not understand what I did because for them, my one function was 5 different functions. There's no title of a general manager in Silicon Valley typically in the consumer tech companies. Maybe some B2B SaaS companies would do it. And they're like, hey, what are you? Are you a product guy? Are you a tech guy? Are you a business guy? How come you wore all these hats? Does it mean that you haven't specialized in any one of these things, right? So it is very interesting how I had to do a second transition and I had to really go back to the basics and break down the fundamental building blocks. So the key,
Before you go on, Bhaskar, I have a question. What was the most jarring culture shock in that transition for you?
hey, so for me, right? Very good question, Chani, right? I think maybe thinking about this, and I'll maybe build up towards your question. I guess the key insight for me is maybe what this slide says is that, hey, they don't really care about credentials or experience, right? These companies care about, hey, how does a Bhaskar, how does a Chani, how does a Nitin, or how does anyone on this call, can you help them solve specific problems at their specific scale, right? So it doesn't really matter that I built Rakuten Pay from, I would say, 5,000 users to 27 million users, or I generated $1 billion of revenue at Rakuten. I had to break it down from a product and tech lens and talk about the users that I acquired, the merchants that I worked with, the ads that I created, and how I monetize the ecosystem. So this is now Silicon Valley speak, right? So it is less about the fact that I manage a 100+ member team, less about the fact that I used to partner with the president of Rakuten Card, less about the fact that the business has generated $1 billion. And I had to work through a lot of hierarchy, organizational churn, and we could call it politics, we could call it navigating complexity. It's now about metrics, outcomes, results, and talking about it in a very simple manner, right? And I'll maybe address this in a little bit, but I remember that the first time someone asked me about, hey, Bhaskar, what did you do at Rakuten? I maybe had a half an hour answer, right? I could go super deep. A year later, I had maybe a 20-minute answer. Nowadays, I have a 1-minute answer. And I realize that's what people are looking for, right? You just need to have very clear stories, very carefully curated stories that talk about, hey, what is it that you did in your time? What did you achieve? And why was it important? So 3 bullet points, maybe a fourth bullet point for the context, right? And that is really tough, right? I mean, for most of us, because we say, hey, you know what? I'm not 4 sentences. I am actually a body of work. I'm a body of experience. I have worked for more than 20 years. But in reality, you'll realize that it's not the 20 years that matter. It's these 4 sentences that matter, right? It's maybe collections of 2 or 3 of these 4 sentences. I mean, you ultimately 2 or 3 stories that you want to highlight to people, right?
The issue remains that, how do you condense all of that in that 4 sentences or 6 sentences, right? How do you ensure crisp but having the depth as well? How do you convey that?
Totally. And very good question. Why don't I maybe talk about how I went about it or what is the framework for it? And then hopefully at the end of this framework, we will have an answer to that. Right? So maybe that, hey, this is essentially the way I would show it. And to me, that some of Chinese questions will fall into this framework, right? So ultimately, talk about as 5 pillars or talk about as a framework or a 5-point axis, right? So ultimately, the first step is mastering the language transition, right? What do these companies care about, right? And once I understand what they care about, I can then talk about it in that manner, right? Then number two, not only do what these companies care about from a story perspective, how do I present myself as a person that can build at their scale, right? It's not enough that I worked at Fidelity as a VP or Visa as a VP and did ABC. How can I translate that to a Cash App at maybe Square? How can they translate that into a Venmo, right? And then there's a lot of meaningful networking that needs to happen, right? Look, a lot of these companies are big now and they have problems. They have problems at scale that they want help in solving. So they need good people. So, how do we ensure that we're connecting with the right people to help get the story across? And then for 4 and 5, right, Chani, this goes back to maybe, hey, every one of us might not be a fit for every one of these companies, right? So someone like me, I guess I have worked in ads, I've worked in data, I've worked a little bit in fintech, right? But if someone says, hey, Bhaskar, there's actually this company that's scaling a lot of core international payments. Do you want to go and do it? I do not know if I might be the right person for it, right? Or, hey, maybe, right, Bhaskar, you worked on data platforms, but we have a company that is, I don't know, working on compute, right? And new ways of compute, right? This is the neural engines. Do you want to go and do it? I don't think I would be able to do it. So ultimately, the question that Chani you asked is, how do I translate my stories into what matters? There needs to be a mapping, right? I have done ABC, right? The companies are looking for DEF. How do I translate my ABC into the DEF, and is that a fit? And I'm sure when you think about it that way, you'll be able to find a fit, right? You will not fit every company, but you'll definitely fit a category of companies. And each category of companies has a different culture, right? I mean, for instance, even when we think about Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, like the typical FANG companies, the cultures in every one of these companies is different, and the types of people that succeed in these companies is different. Then when you go into the next level, say, hey, I actually want to think about Uber, DoorDash, Instacart, again, 3 very different companies. You didn't say, let's go to fintech. I'm going to think about Stripe. I'm going to think about PayPal. I'm going to think about Cash or Block, very different companies, right? Therefore, ultimately, it's about identifying where you can negotiate from your strengths, not about, hey, I am an empty vessel. Let me come and fill up to help you. It's more about, this is you, this is me. Let's partner. So maybe that moving to the next piece, and I'll quickly run through some of these slides. I mean, there's a lot of content, but I'm hoping that I can wrap through these slides in maybe the next 10, 15 minutes and then open up for discussion towards the last about 15 to 20 minutes, right? So ultimately, maybe that when I did the first transition, it was not about, hey, I managed a $2 billion investment portfolio, which resulted in $200 million of revenue, right? It was more about I built data-driven decision-making frameworks at scale, right? So I almost had to think through, hey, what did I do? How can I think about platformizing what I did? How can I think about frameworks? How can I think about data-driven decision making and not just talk about, hey, I worked with data scientists, I worked with researchers, and we built quantitative models to manage money. Well, what did we do? We built platforms that ingested models that helped other people manage money. So it's a completely different language, right? And then likewise, when you think about maybe folks at our level these days, I mean, that's the corporate leadership to big tech transition. It's not about, hey, I'm the VP of digital transformation at a Fidelity or the Visa. It's not about I'm general manager for this company doing ABC. You talk about how you led product innovation at Fidelity that drove, I don't know, 10x new customer growth, or that improved customer engagement by 20%, or that enabled your CSAT scores or your NPS scores to grow up by 40%, right? So you convert everything that you did into a metrics and a user perspective or a growth perspective, right? And what I essentially tell people here, I mean, I coach folks for this as well, right? I work with people to help them tell the stories better, to transition to big tech. And the perspective is I tell them to both up level and down level certain things, right? So what are the things that you want to downplay? Look, Meta, Google, Amazon, all these big tech companies are now huge, complex organizations. And they want to look at executives that have navigated large companies, but they don't want to hear about organizational politics or bureaucracy, right? So ultimately, they want people that will simplify complexity, that can navigate through complexity, but they don't want to hear that you navigated through complexity. You show what you did rather than tell what you did. So, hey, I worked at Rakuten and drove $1 billion of new revenue by building our pay app and by monetizing the app. I think that statement alone conveys the complexity of what I should have done, because a payment app needs to have users on one side, merchants on the other. Monetizing the app through the ads means that I also work with advertisers. Monetizing the app also means that I had to work with the e-com marketplace, right? So I am showing the complexity of what I did without talking about all the organization politics or the bureaucracy. Hey, not only did I do that, I also drove user growth from less than 5,000 MAU to 25 million users, right? Then you talk about the business outcomes and you talk about the risks that you took. You talk about how you unblocked issues that you created. And then you also talk about, hey, I'm iterative. I go fast when I need to. I can actually, not only can I build RPA into a 25 million user app, at Flipkart, I also built a business where we went 0 to 1 in 3 months. So you showcase speed, scale, complexity based on outcomes, growth based on metrics, right? So ultimately talk about impact, innovation, growth, speed, scale, rather than processes, rather than bureaucracies or politics. Right? I mean, I'll maybe skip this. We spent enough time on this. It's ultimately, look, titles don't matter. What matters is outcomes. What matters is growth. What matters is how you achieved or what you achieved, right?
Hang on. I have a question for you, Bhaskar. Tell us why big tech matters.
Hey, that's a very interesting question, right? I think there have been people that have worked in big tech for a long time and would say, hey, FANG is the only way to go, or Meta is the best company ever, etc., right? So I would not really subscribe to those I would say simplistic worldviews. Look, at the end of the day, I think we are all here. We have worked for maybe anywhere between 15 to 20 years across multiple companies, and I'm sure we have all enjoyed our times, right? So I think about this from like multiple access perspective, right? Look, big tech companies offer you the scale that I think very few other companies do, right? Primarily because of the fact that these are all in winner takes all markets. So the scale that you get to work in big tech, it's very rare to get that in other companies. So scale is number one. Then number two is the brand value of the big tech companies. I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, these are companies that employ or that are considered to employ the brightest people and the best people in Silicon Valley. Therefore, you essentially get a lot of halo from the brand name, and the brand name matters. Then number three, I mean, because these have been winner takes all markets and big tech companies have done well, I think working there for a few years also gives you financial runway and optionality on what you want to do next, right? So I look at big tech as, hey, I did the same thing in startup ABC, my startup failed, or I did the same thing in startup D if my startup didn't really scale. But then someone else that maybe had a much easier life in a Google or a Meta, right, made 10x of what I did, right? And that's unfair. I mean, that's one way to look at it. Or the other way to look at it is saying, hey, I have actually done all these things. I've worked my ass off. I've seen growth. I've seen companies succeed. I've seen companies fail. Now I just go happen to work in big tech. I got the brand name. I got some financial runway. Now I can actually go back to doing what I want to do, right? So that's the way I think about big tech, right? And look, I will say that working in big tech does open doors in Silicon Valley if this is what people want to do, right? And for what it's worth, I mean, I think the way, look, when I worked in banking, I worked in New York, and I would say, yes, while financial markets were maybe a little bit more distributed than big tech, I mean, you had financial markets in Chicago, in London, etc., and maybe the energy markets were in Houston. I would say New York is where most of the innovation happened. So in tech, I mean, I do know that after pandemic, things have sort of distributed. You do have Seattle, you have Austin, you have New York, you have quite a few places where tech ecosystems are propped up. but Silicon Valley is still where most of the action is. So I think ultimately, in the long run, if you want to innovate and you want to be relevant to Silicon Valley and you want to have, I would say, some fun, the way big tech thinks fun, big tech offers you a lot of optionality.
There is a little, like, there is unique ways of thought processes too. So going from like having your own startups or working for startups and getting the FANG again through different big tech companies with very different cultures, you learn a lot that can be applied towards your next role, if you want to found your own companies or join another startup. So there is a lot of value there as well. So
Big
yeah.
time. Big time. Look, a lot of folks, work in big tech for a few years. I've seen a lot of startup people do multiple startups. And if the startups get bought by big tech, that's awesome. They had an exit. Now they can go back to startups even more. But I see a lot of other people that have worked in startups anywhere from 10 to 15 years, then join big tech, spend a few years there, right? Get some sort of financial runway, then go back into startups again, right? So ultimately, I would say that the advantage of big tech is given that they operate in winner takes all markets, it's almost like that if you are willing to put up with the scale and if you're willing to learn and unlearn the language, if you're willing to sort of do or put in the dues, right, it can actually help you, right?
Okay, and there is one good question here from Desi. How do we exactly figure out what the exact role need? Usually JD is pretty much high level and do not say much, which is true. Like, how do we navigate around that generic job descriptions?
Got it. Hey, so then maybe that I'm going to skip a few slides and let me come back to these slides later. So let me maybe spend some time on this, right? So it's not going to directly answer your question, but I will indirectly answer it and then I'll come into the question itself, right? So, hey, every one of these firms has a separate or a different DNA, right? And ultimately, most of the JDs end up being generic, but if you network, and this is what I mean by network, like you mean it, right? You got to go connect. You got to meet folks in real life. You got to go and hear their thoughts on, hey, what is this company, right? What do you feel good about? How long have you been in this company? What are the pluses about the company? What are the minuses about the company? So you got to ask the same type of questions to multiple people in each company to figure out what that company is. Number one. Then number two, you then need to understand, hey, does this company have a product culture, a tech culture, or a business culture? Right? I am deliberately using these words very differently, right? Or there's also an operational culture that's related to the business culture, right? Now, what does it mean? It's a Google. Google is considered a tech company, right? So, what does it mean? Google does a lot of research, and this is how they always operated. They work, they find the technology first, they then find the use case later, right? I think the joke with Google has always been that I'm sure if someone breaks apart Google, you will actually find easily 10 $1 trillion companies hiding inside Google that are currently not being monetized or that they actually do not know what to do with, right? So Google is a tech first company, right? So if you think about it, right? If you want a PM at Google, what would they want you to do, right? So they actually want PMs who can monetize engineering innovations, or they want people who are platform thinkers who scale technical capabilities, or they want people that can drive revenue growth from existing tech assets. They want people that have a deep understanding on how to partner with engineers and with tech people. That they want systemic data-driven approach to product development, right? So now Google and Meta will put out generic JDs that say we are looking for product managers, or we're looking for engineering managers, or we're looking for TPMs. They will essentially put out JDs that talk about the job function or the job role that a chat GPT would have created. But unless you do research and speak with people and network, you would not be able to identify, hey, this is what Google is, right? Therefore, Google has a different interview focus than some of the other companies, right? Therefore, Google is a good fit for technical PMs with engineering backgrounds. They are good fit for people that love building platforms versus consumer features, right? They are good fit for people that think in systems and scale, and people that are comfortable with technical complexity, right? So this, you're right, the JD would not tell you. You will have to do the mapping. This goes back to the storytelling and the mapping, right? You know who you are. You then need to go and map out companies across different categories: ad tech, consumer tech, cloud, data, Gen AI, the future of sort of Gen AI, AGI, fintech, etc. Then list down companies and then say, hey, these are the skills that this market or category needs. Then this is what is unique about each and every company, right? So, look, I worked at Meta, and Meta is a very interesting company, right? I actually think Meta is as pure a product company as you would get. Not that Meta doesn't focus on tech. Meta has a lot of ex-Google engineers who work at Meta who claim that, hey, Meta moves fast, so we love Meta, and Meta actually brings up products to life faster than Google, so we love being in Meta. Now, why does Meta bring products to life faster? Because in Meta, a product manager is a chief enabling officer. You're a CEO, not a chief executive officer, you're a chief enabling officer. Your job is to be like a startup CEO within a large company, right? You get things done within the organization. You think big and you build big and you don't care about ambiguity. You might have 10 different people trying to do similar things. The question is, how can you come up with the product idea that resonates well with users, with consumers, with advertisers, or with other parties, right? So ultimately, I tell people that, hey, if you want an environment which is very collegial, where there's not a lot of clarity, but there's not a lot of formal authority, and no one is going to say, don't do A, B, or C, Meta would be great for you, right? So Meta typically sees a lot of startup founders and early employees, people that love fast-paced, high-energy environments, people that prefer influence. You can influence people to work with you because there's not a lot of formal hierarchies, right? And a lot of people, they just figure it as you go. So Meta's interview process is shaped on that, right? And maybe let me talk about maybe one more company, right? Amazon, right? Amazon, interestingly, is a business-driven company. They prefer people that think like general managers, right? They have deep customer obsession and a lot of long-term thinking. So it's almost like the opposite thinking of Meta. I don't think Amazon people figure it out as you go. They actually think 100 times, write a 6-pager, then review that 6 pages 100 times with multiple level of hierarchy, refine it, and then they go and invest. When they go and invest, they also have very strong operational discipline. They track metrics on a daily basis, right? They have a lot of processes to ensure that once they have decided what to do, they go and do it, right? And they also have a lot of data-driven decision making, right? And therefore, right, this is actually a good fit for people that love processes and systematic thinking, right? They want people that are very deliberate in what they do, right? They want people that will drive P&L growth. Therefore, their interview process is also based on that, right? Hey, does that address the question?
Desi, do you have any follow-up? No, she's good.
Awesome.
She said.
She says she's good. And likewise, it while I'm at this, let me talk about a few more companies. Like when I also talked about, I think, fintech. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about a newer company like DoorDash, and then ultimately, I think a lot of us want to figure out, hey, what's the future, right? OpenAI is changing a lot of things. So, what do we need to do to get there, right? So very quickly, that I mean, if you are in payments, ultimately Stripe, they think they are payments first company. They want people with a lot of deep payments and fintech domain expertise. Then they want people with a lot of regulatory, legal compliance thinking. And they want people that think about all the ways that a developer would think about payments, right? So Stripe essentially wants technical PMs that grasp financial infra, people that are comfortable with regulatory complexity, and then people that execute fast as well, right? I would say DoorDash is a very interesting company that they are like a Meta Amazon hybrid, right? They actually marry Meta's execution speed with Amazon's operational discipline. So they think fast, act fast, and do fast, right? And that's why they're able to succeed because the sort of market which DoorDash operates is a very, very low margin market, right? How long did it take Uber to scale? How long did it take Uber to break even? But DoorDash has broken even, or maybe they haven't broken even either, but they have scaled way faster than Uber and they're operating at a higher margin than Uber, right? So they look for people with strong marketplace logistics backgrounds, people that are comfortable with both speed and process, and people that are both operations minded and move fast, right? And maybe let me use OpenAI to sort of wrap it up, right? So ultimately, now when a lot of us think about, hey, what's next for us, right? Hey, I've done ABC, and I know Silicon Valley keeps evolving, and I want to position myself for the future of Silicon Valley, right? I think that, I mean, and when I say OpenAI, this is not just about OpenAI, this is about OpenAI and the future of all these Gen AI and AGI companies, right? Ultimately, a lot of these companies and these spaces are maybe similar to where maybe search was maybe 20 years ago, right? Where ad tech was 10 or 15 years ago, where consumer tech was 10 years ago. And this to me is very similar to the early days of iPhone coming out and people developing a lot of apps, which means that companies like OpenAI, Claude, uh, Google Gemini, right, which is within Google, and any of these other startups in the space, they will want people that are deep tech visionaries, right? So you need to be a big picture AI tech visionary, but you need to also be able to immediately execute, right? Because these companies, if you don't ship fast, you're going to die. You literally have to ship within days, right? Especially with the advent of vibe coding, a lot of us will need to become way more hands-on than what we are, and we should be able to use AI to code and prototype for us, not just write PRDs, right? So we need to have a fairly good and deep technical understanding of AI ML. And we also need to figure out, hey, what resonates? Who is a consumer? Is it like a user? Is it an advertiser? Is it an enterprise? And we need to be able to translate our thoughts into sort of research, right? So to me, right, I think all of us need to become more future proof and all of us need to prepare for this. So these companies, therefore, would focus on product intuition, right? ML and AI depth. And can you actually rapidly prototype? Are you hands-on enough, et cetera, right? So I'll sort of stop here because I mean I think there's like a lot of content to see if there's any questions, and then I'm going to segue back into the product interview prep, and then we can wrap it up, right?
Sounds good. While he's finding the slide, if people have any questions, please post them here in the chat.
Awesome. Hey, so now let's look at this, right? So overall, ultimately, right, I mean, I think all these companies, I mean, this is both good and bad, right? I mean, this is both the plus and the minus of how these companies think. Look, a lot of these companies have tried to convert the interview process into a science, right? Ultimately, interviewing could be an art, but I tell people it's both a science, right? They look for specific signals which tell them that these people would be successful. Then it's our job to ensure that we offer them those signals. So typically, right, what I've seen is all these companies that I mentioned, they focus a lot on product sense, like almost a fourth or higher is given for product sense weightage. Then an equal amount of weight is given for what is called as product strategy or product insight. And then there's another fourth in what they call as analytics or data-driven decisioning. And then the last fourth is in behavioral, right? So ultimately, look, we would come from environments, especially in the corporate world, where almost all the questioning is behavioral. But here you will see that it's barely 1/4 of the entire process. Right? They care more about disruption, disruptive thinking, and data-driven decision making. You also have some technical components. I mean, I think Google, Stripe, and a few companies still conduct technical interviews where they want to go deep, right? So, I mean, let's think about product sense. Like, what does product sense mean, right? So, essentially, they are trying to figure out, hey, can you think like a product leader at massive scale over here? Right? So, they want to understand, hey, if I ask this person a question, can they actually think about why are we or why are they building the product? Why now? And why is this product relevant? What are the market trends? How does it fit to the company strategy, right? If you say, hey, I want to develop a chat GPT wrapper for customer service, like, why now? Well, looks like the entire world is moving towards AI wrappers for chat and natural language processing, which is what NLP, which is what this used to be called, right? NLP has advanced so much that AI agent can answer questions or a bot can answer questions better than a human being. Oh, wow, is this the case? And all the competitors are going to be doing it. If we don't do it, we are going to be left behind, right? Then you talk about, hey, if I know this is a product I need to build, how do I map out the ecosystem? Who are my stakeholders? Who are my audiences, right? How do I prioritize? And then ultimately, how do I figure out what problem I'm solving? And then ultimately, what is the solution that I develop, right? It needs to be what should be the MVP. And then ultimately, what's the 3-year evolution and what is the roadmap? So this is the way you think about product sense. And increasingly, a lot of companies focus on product sense. And to me, product sense thinking will also help you shape your own stories, right? And if you see the structure, this is no different than the structure we discussed earlier about how to shape your stories, how to tell your stories. The second component is what I call is product strategy or product insight, right? And this goes hand in hand with product sense. So here you're thinking a little bit one level higher, right? Hey, what are the market trends and the behavioral sort of shifts that would impact me, that make me relevant or that make me irrelevant, right? What are the company's strengths? Then how have things evolved, right? And the typical questions that you'll be asked here is, hey, should Google buy Roomba? Should Netflix enter into gaming? What should Uber do next? What should Google do next, right? So they're thinking about, hey, can you actually think big? And can you actually not just think big? It's not just about, hey, Google should go, I don't know, Google should go and build a chat GPT competitor. I mean, could be an easy answer, but that's also a lazy answer, right? Because you're not thinking through what makes Google better or worse than chat GPT. And why should it be called chat GPT, right? Search is now called Googling. And now, has Google already given up the space to chat GPT that you're saying, hey, Google should build a chat GPT wrapper? You think Larry Page will be happy with that? So there's a lot of context that we need to give above before we go into it, right? And likewise, analytics is again about data-driven problem solving, data-driven decisioning. Right? Can you come up with a clear hypothesis for why you thought something is important? How do you define the metrics? How do you make the decisions? And how do you do the experimentation testing and root cause analysis at scale, right? Ultimately, everything is about finding what the problem is or what should be solved, solving for it, or it's about identifying what the trade-offs are and solving for them, right? The last part is behavioral. And we spend some time here and I stop for questions. I see a couple of questions coming in. And behavioral is ultimately about, hey, how do you sort of answer your own background in a very clear, precise, concise manner, right? And this goes back to Chinese question on how do I take my background and if I just look at my work in one company, I can talk about it for 1 hour or half an hour. And you want me to say that in like 30 seconds or 1 minute? That makes zero sense, right? So this is where then you just break it down, right? You break it down and just set the context, right? I recommend that people typically use the CAR method, context, action, result. And sometimes I say that, hey, it's not just car, it's C car or double C car, right? C car is setting up the context at the company level, double C car is setting up the context at the industry level, right? Or you could even do triple C car that sets the context at the trends level, trend, industry, company, your group, your problem, then what you did, then what you achieved, right? So this approach will pretty much help you marry the stories and shape the stories and tell them the way you want it, right? And that's also a lot of deep content. Hey, maybe should we look at the questions, Chani? I saw a 100 question, at least one.
Sure, yeah. RB, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, Bhaskar. I have a question around just like how do you answer a question where you're being asked about your greatest weakness or greatest development area? Like, for example, if the question was around failure, I think, then you give a story from your experience. But if you're being asked about greatest weakness or development area, then I feel like it's not so much of a story, but it's like a tricky question, Like, for example, I wouldn't want to say something like a core PM skill, right? Like I'm a PM, so I don't think I want to talk about a core PM skill because that would not be good. But at the same time, it has to be something substantial. I don't want to give a wishy-washy answer like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. Everyone's going to say that, right? So, and I'm also torn between, do I pick a hard skill? Like, do I talk about, oh, I want to like code in this particular language, or I want to like learn how to do LLM evals, or do I pick a soft skill? So do you have any advice related to this?
Totally. Yep. Hey, maybe first is a joke, right? But I would typically answer that question by saying, hey, my biggest area of development is not slapping the person that asked me a completely irrelevant question, right? But since we can't say that or do that, right? Hey, so this is what I would say, right? Look, companies are getting increasingly creative. In fact, I listed some of the questions over here, right? Hey, tell me what is your biggest learning? How do you handle tough feedback? What is your developmental area for you? What is your biggest weakness? And some companies even ask questions which can catch people off guard. If I call a manager, what will they say about you? Right? And questions like this actually really catch people off guard because you're in the middle of work and you know that companies do reference checks. And you're like, hey, this is the first question that they're asking me, or this is one of the first questions they're asking me in my first screening call. Are they going to record this question? Then later go and ask my manager the same question, right? So I would say companies are not making it fair, right? I think a lot of these questions can appear like they're showing you the middle finger, but let's actually take a step back, right? Hey, ultimately, what are these questions trying to ask? So think about it from a signal perspective, okay? The interviewer let's just assume good intent on the interviewer, okay? Assuming good intent on the interviewer wants to see that you are a person, and any person has strengths and weaknesses, and you are working towards something to make you better. Okay. Then they're also trying to see, hey, is this person a match for my company? Okay. Let's assume, going back to the personas I talked about, right? Let's assume that you are someone that gets things done. You act fast and you move fast and you hate, I don't know, technology people that you think drag their feet. Google will not be the good fit for you, right? There you cannot go and say, hey, I love to move fast and I hate it when people use technology as a reason why we cannot do things, right? But that could be a good answer where maybe you go to a Meta and say, hey, what's the area of development for you? You could say, hey, I've been in startups, I love to move fast, but I realize that sometimes technology hasn't caught up with my sort of ambitions or my visions or what I would like to do. So I had to slow down to ensure that, I don't know, I'm bringing a tech team together with me, right? That may be a good answer for a Meta or a Google or a Amazon or maybe DoorDash, but definitely not for a Google or an OpenAI, right? So ultimately, you need to then map your answers to somewhat to the company, right? And this is also where homework and research matters, right? So I know it seems unfair, and I know it looks like you'll have to prepare a lot. It's not just the networking, it's not just getting the interview call. Then the interview call itself can be like a crazy random event. But this is where, right, the homework, the research, then the hours you put in matters, right? So ultimately, I would say should be a genuine enough answer. It doesn't matter if it's hard or soft, but if it applies to the context. So for instance, if someone said, hey, Bhaskar, tell me a current development area for you, I might say, hey, I joined TikTok. It's been 6 months and I love it because it seems to be an early stage company closer to my time at Flipkart or even the new group that I created at Meta. But one of the things that I need to navigate is the cultural context because 95% of my colleagues are Chinese. And I realize most of them do not speak English the way I do it. So I have to simplify my communication. I have to use much simpler words, simpler sentences than I normally do. Right. So now I actually told something real without throwing me or throwing anyone under the bus and without trying to be too smart as well. Right. So it's a balance, right? It's not easy, but you literally have to have multiple tries to get this done. And ultimately, ChatGPT or Claude is your friend in trying to figure out the best answer for this. Right. Hey, and there's one more question, I think, above RB's question, Chani, right? From Z.
Yeah, so it's not much of a question, but rather guidance. So Z, why don't you come off mute and talk to us?
Sure. Hope you can hear me okay.
Good.
And so I think just more of talking to friends. I work at Amazon, so I have friends who work at Meta and Google. And it's just kind of like we're comparing those, after rough week or what have you, right? It's just more of even the company you love, get a sense of what their culture. I think like Bhaskar mentioned, the way they think about their business, whether it's a business product or something else, change like drives how their culture is. Amazon's very escalation heavy and very intense. So if that's like you're not comfortable kind of confrontational conversation, Amazon will be a pretty shocking like kind of initial few months, right? Where talking to people at Google, there's more soft, more care given to the employee and the culture itself. That's kind of just something I picked up over the time.
Yep. No, definitely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And this is also where the homework matters. It's ultimately, it's not just about breaking into big tech, but it's also thriving there, right? I mean, look, I have a lot of mentees who currently work at Meta, Google, and even some of these other companies. I mean, the reason why I know these cultures is because not only have I helped people get into some of these companies, I continue mentoring and coaching them after they have joined these companies. So every company's culture is different, and also we are going through a fairly interesting time in the tech world, right, where even great cultures have become not great, and some badly good cultures have become bad, right? And you then need to figure out how to navigate these companies and how to sort of sustain yourself and then and not get caught up in some of the bad aspects of the culture. So to me, the way I say it is like, look, it's a job. I mean, yes, ultimately we all want our jobs to be our extended families, right? Which I still think that way, right? I don't think it's purely a job. Then it's treated as a person, right? There are aspects, I don't think like any of us think that anyone is perfect, including ourselves, which treat your job the same way. There are going to be components that you like, there are going to be components that you don't like. Just ensure that you don't get caught up in the components that you don't like or that are not good for you, right?
I think the other aspect also is, there is culture, there is meta culture, right? So if you get through certain rounds, initial rounds, and you learn about what team you potentially may be joining, understanding that organization would help a lot as well, right? So especially now with this tremendous shift in the culture. Yeah, the company culture may help to start, but the research doesn't really end there. You got to dig deeper. And for Amazon, I would go talk to Z and like, hey, tell me more about this team if you can. If you can connect me to somebody within that team, right? So go a step further.
Yep. No, and that's the key, right? Look, a lot of these companies also have subcultures, right? Look, even a Meta, I mean, which has this overarching Meta culture, look at 60,000 people, or maybe it's 70, 80,000 people now. I think it's at least 8 verticals or 8 large SVP groups. And then within each of that, I'm sure the teams or groups have anywhere from 50 to 100 people. So lots of cultures and subcultures, right? So ultimately, you will have to figure out what makes sense for you. But the way I say it is that, I mean, it's almost like when I think people say, look, you also manifest what you want. I mean, I would not really go to that extent, but ultimately, I tell people a lot of us have more influence than we think. A lot of us have more power than we think, and we can influence the situation to make it work enough for us, right? Here, I can share the deck. I mean, it's essentially like a deck that I made in Claude, right? So I don't think it's downloadable, but let me see if I can share the link. And then maybe I'll quickly wrap it up, right? Hey, to sort of summarize it, right? Look, focusing on outcomes matters, not credentials, and focusing on impact, right? Then using context that resonates, then don't really over explain or over focus on corporate and international experience. And then ultimately, the stories, right? I mean, to me, all of us should have 3 to 4 perfect stories. And this is not easy, right? I mean, for instance, I had a very exploratory conversation with like a firm some time ago. In fact, Chani and I, we talk to each other quite often. I actually spent about half an hour chatting with her saying, hey, Chani, this is the conversation I'm going to have. Does the story make sense, right? And we pretty much refined it over the course of a conversation. So find partners, right? So this is a work in progress for everyone. So just because I got into something doesn't mean all my stories are perfect. It is not. But I recognize that my stories need to be perfect. I recognize that when I talk to anyone, and even for an explore call, look, there's no such thing as a coffee, right? I tell people that every conversation you have with someone is an interview, unfortunately, right? which means that we need to approach every interaction with an intentional focus and present the best way, right? And in fact, this question that I shared earlier, right? I forgot if the question from RB or someone, right? On the behavioral question. Like about a year ago, I didn't realize I was working in an interview. I had an informational discussion with a friend's friend who was at a much smaller but fast-growing at a company, and I had just literally gotten off a meeting with my manager. He's a good enough manager, but he was new at Meta, and we disagreed on a lot of things. And this person came late, 10 minutes late to a half an hour call, and we chit-chatted a few things. And then after the chit-chat, he pretty much said, hey, I want to understand how you work on a day-to-day basis. If you call your manager today and ask him to tell about you, what would he say? And that question was like, to me, it was literally jarring to me. I'm like, why the heck is this guy asking me this question now? Right? And I had literally minutes ago, I had gotten off a very difficult conversation with my manager, right? So all these curveballs can throw people off, right? And we just have to sort of take a step back and realize, hey, what this question means is, are there weaknesses or are there strengths, or how do you as a person resonate with that particular company, right? And then overall, right, I mean, I think I'm going to skip a few slides, but ultimately, right, look, it's all about translating your language into their language, right? It's all about positioning. And this is not just about breaking it, it's about how do you break in and how do you thrive and how do you continue to succeed. And I'll be sort of glad to connect with people, right? Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I mean, I haven't kicked off a workshop series yet, but I do work with people a lot one-on-one. And reason why I do more one-on-one rather than workshops is I realize that that everyone's needs are different, and I need to tailor my approach, right? So with some people, it's about telling better stories. With some people, it's about literally working on their resume and their LinkedIn. With some people, it's about a different aspect of what they did. So every one of these things is sort of different. I'll sort of stop here. I know we still have a few minutes and can maybe take one more question or two.
Yeah, while you take questions, I need to quickly pull up the QR code for feedback. So if you stop sharing.
Sound good?
All right, people. Do take a 30 seconds and give us feedback. How we can help you, how we can come up with better content. Would you like a follow-up from Bhaskar? What would you want to hear from him again? There's a question. What are some ways to include storytelling in communication while keeping it concise?
Practice, practice, practice. Hey, nothing beats practice.
I couldn't agree more.
And working with, I would say, people like me that can help you refine that practice.
Yes, definitely reach out to Bhaskar. He has helped me so much in curating carefully, crafting my stories carefully. So I highly recommend talking to Bhaskar.
Yeah, and the framework is a CCAR framework, right? Look, at the end of the day, it's about how do you context, action, result, context at your group level, your company level, your industry level, and then the overall trends, right? It's in the slides.
Okay, the slides are shared here, and it will also be shared through Sidebar email. There will be a follow-up.
Awesome.
Get all that content. But yeah, please provide us some feedback. That'll be very helpful. We are at time. Thank you everyone for joining. Bhaskar, this was really awesome. Thank you for sharing everything that you worked on bringing all of this to us. And I look forward to meeting you all again in the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bhaskar. Thanks, Johnny. Bye.
Thanks, team. Bye-bye.